All right. Let me give it a few more minutes for everybody to come in from the waiting room and log in. Outstanding. A little housekeeping. If you have your cameras on and you're a guest in our audience, turn your cameras off if you don't mind. And same thing with your microphones. We will certainly have time to take some questions and we'll do that. But cameras off, microphones off, except for our panelists, please. All right. My name is Frank McElwain. I work for Garver, and today I'm wearing my hat as a board member of the South Central Chapter of SCCAAAE. Welcome to another session of Conversation with Colleagues. We do this once a month. This month, we're honored to have HNTB and Vivek as our sponsor. Vivek has brought to us a great panel that I'll let him introduce. But today, what we're talking about is the future of mobility, opportunities and challenges. So excited to have all of our panelists with us, excited to have you guests and have those questions ready for the chat. Before I turn it over to you, Vivek, I want to say a commercial for the chapter. If you haven't already registered and you haven't made your plans to travel to Oklahoma City, our annual conference is going to be starting Saturday. That's May 13th and running through Wednesday, May 17th. Go to the chapter website and register if you haven't yet. And for you consultants and vendors, it's not too late to sponsor as well. All right, Vivek, the floor is yours. Thank you, my friend, for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank, and good afternoon. I'm really thankful to Frank and the AAAE staff for this wonderful series where we get to rub shoulders or hear and interact these wonderful subject matter experts on a variety of topics. I'm really appreciative of you all taking time from a busy day to join with us today. Just a brief pitch about myself. My name is Vivek Khanna, and I work as Senior Project Manager here with HNTB from our Plano, Texas office. My career in aviation, I probably have touched a lot of you. I've had the opportunity to work for both the public and private sectors. And I've learned, I can say, looking back, valuable lessons from each. I am quite passionate about aviation, and my day job focuses me on airside infrastructure. Today, our panel of experts, like Frank said, will talk about the future of mobility, which we all expect will be the next disruptor in aerospace. And each presenter will go into some details about the challenges and opportunities that they see from their perspective. For more than 100 years, our aerospace industries have been at the forefront of innovation and have established themselves firmly as global leaders. Starting from the first flight to the first steps on the moon, the industry has led our economic and national security successes, both domestically and internationally. And today, as we stand about 109 years after the launch of first commercial airline service, we are at the cusp of what promises to be a new era of aviation. And I'm talking about advanced air mobility, or as some of us call it, as urban air mobility, which promises to change our lives with the emergence of this transformative technology to transport people and goods in new, environmentally friendly, perhaps, aircraft for both rural and urban environments. Some of the studies estimate this may reach almost, for the US market alone, $155 billion annually by 2035, which is about 0.5% of our GDP and could create up to 280,000 high-paying jobs. For you today, we have 3 experts that will talk about their perspective. What my plan is to have a presentation from each of the presenters and then a Q&A session right after. What I recommend is go ahead and type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we will take them up after the panelists have spoken. And so, without much ado, what I would like to do is turn it over to the real experts and introduce the first of the speakers, to you. The first speaker is Mike Branham, a program manager for FAA's Emerging Entrance Division. Mike has a track record of success in creating innovative strategic planning products, the coordination of intergovernmental policy, legislation, and operationalizing complex data and analytics for use by end users to create organizational efficiencies. Mike also holds a commercial pilot's license and therefore has a unique perspective on mobility. The other two speakers, I want to just briefly touch on them, and I will introduce them as they come up, are Karen Corrier from the Houston Airport System. She's the Director of Planning for the airport system. And then Leiden Sleeper will be the last but not least. He's the East Policy Lead for Joby Aviation. Without ado, I'd like to have Mike talk about his perspective. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek, and thank you to SCCAAAE and the chapter for the opportunity to share some information. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. We'll move forward with some slides, and really appreciate you all as well that are attending, taking the time out of your day and really kind of over the lunch hour to tune in on some of this information. So before I go ahead and dive right in, just confirming that you all are able to see the slide deck. Give a thumbs up, maybe. Excellent. Okay. Well, with that said, I'll go ahead and dive right in. So for those of you that were able to, maybe in, I guess it was kind of late February, March timeframe, the ASW, or the Airport Southwest Region, hosted their annual meeting. And some of this information is going to be very similar to what was shared at that time. But really, what I prepared today is really just kind of something that covers the landscape of how we are evaluating emerging entrants, and really more specifically from the Office of Airports, providing insight on that lens with which we're looking at these opportunities with industry, with other federal government stakeholders. So really, this is not just kind of an isolated, kind of siloed effort that's occurring within the agency. There's several different lines of businesses that are working with airports. Several different lines of businesses within FAA that are working with folks like Leiden and Joby and other OEMs that are out there. So we're engaged on multiple fronts. So really today I'm going to be honing in on again what we are doing as it relates to Office of Airports and Emergency Entrance Division. So what the Emerging Entrance Division, some of you may not have heard of it before. It is somewhat new. So formally it was stood up late last year. So Carrie Lyons, if anybody has worked with her in the past, she used to be Chief of Staff for the front office at headquarters, and has a very diverse background. She is our what we call our fearless leader, right? So she's tackling things on a daily basis. There's several of us that are hired on to support her. But really what we're looking at in terms of our portfolios is unmanned aircraft, commercial space, as well as advanced air mobility and the infrastructure that's associated with that, looking at really just a combination of different factors that would come into play when we're planning for and implementing infrastructure and the related, really kind of the supportive elements as well of development to facilitate AAM activity. So where do we fit kind of within the organization? So if you're familiar with the Office of Airports, we do have several different directorates. Airport planning and programming is one of them. We have a compliance side as well. But then in the safety and standards directorate, here's kind of where we fit. So AAS 200, when it was formally stood up again late last year, this is kind of showing where we fit within everything. So AAS 1, that's John Dermody. I'm sure you all have heard his name and I spoke with him or seen him present before. AAS 2 is Tricia Hyatt, and you can kind of see here's where we fit within the org chart. So running through quickly today, and Vivek, please keep me honest in the time. If I'm running long, I definitely don't want to take away from others on the panel. I'm going to try to cover a lot of things across what we call our portfolios today, and leave you all with some takeaways as well. Maybe a few teasers about some things that are kind of upcoming as well that might be of interest as it relates to AAM. So really, advanced air mobility. I keep saying AAM. Maybe some of you are like, why? The acronyms, right? We can't get away from them in aviation. But if you weren't already kind of plugged in, at least the way that we're evaluating advanced air mobility and AAM and the integration of this technology, here's kind of the landscape. So AAM was really this umbrella term for several different components of technology and development and aircraft that essentially come into a nexus or come into a head for really what's kind of this, some folks are calling it the next jet age. Some people are calling it, kind of this next leap in technology integration for aviation and other things. And we're certainly interested in kind of societal benefits when we hear about these types of things. But in general, there's kind of urban area activity that we expect is going to occur with these new electric aircraft. Oftentimes they're called eVTOLs, or electric vertical takeoff and land. In some instances, you may hear even stall or short takeoff and land tied to some of the different platforms out there being proposed by different OEMs. So the areas with which they're going to need to land, maybe it's an urban area, maybe it's a rural area, the customers and the services that are offered, the goods that are going to be delivered. Really, AAM is kind of this umbrella term. It's kind of a catch-all for several different things. But you can see it's movement of goods and people, and for a variety of different means, to include even kind of private and recreational purposes. So where have we, the Office of Airports, been really focusing some of our efforts? And really, it starts back in the 2018 reauth, issued for us from Congress, basically an order of we need to start researching and evaluating AAM infrastructure and develop essentially guidance and policy that aligns with that. So in essence, what that looked at is at a high level, going out, seeing what kind of the current practices are related to this type of infrastructure and activity. Some folks may recall back in, I think it was 1991, we actually had a vertiport design advisory circular that was issued, but really that was primarily for civilian tilt rotor technology or aircraft. Really, I guess I would describe it as maybe ultimately that AC was probably not utilized very much just because of limitations, I think, for mass production of that type of aircraft and its use. So that AC for vertiport design was actually canceled, if I recall correctly, it was in 2010. So we're actually revisiting vertiports and this type of concept in a different way. Different technologies play different design of aircraft than kind of the previous iteration. So really that kind of falls into literature review and cap analysis, where we've been going with the research, really kind of as things kicked off after the 2018 reauth and our tech center up in New Jersey started really kind of starting to take the reins of this and work with our research partners. So where we've gone, where we are today actually is almost kind of, we're showing this loop of a graphic on the right-hand side of the slide here, but really we're finally at a point where we're doing operational testing. That's starting, no kidding, this week. Some dry runs for our operational testing are starting to occur. And I'll dive into that a little bit more later in the slide deck, but what are the types of things that we're testing for? And really at this initial state, we're looking for precision of landing, so landing scatter. We're looking at as well, what are the approach and departure profiles for the aircraft, as well as looking at downwash and outwash from the rotors or the propellers on these aircraft, whether it's a multi-copter, whether it is essentially going to be a powered lift type aircraft that maybe is using ducted fans as well to provide that lift, or maybe it's using kind of a combination of lift and cruise type of capability as well. So there's several different platforms that we're evaluating as part of the operational profile. And so in addition to the approach departure corridors, or excuse me, not corridors, approach departure procedures, but also our landing precision and the downwash outwash. Really what we're trying to look at as well is turning radius of the aircraft if that's a capability. So these are kind of the four key areas that we're honing in on right now for the operational research that's starting, like I said, this week. So what does that kind of look like? What you're seeing on the screen is we're basically going to measure off kind of our takeoff and our TLOF, our FATO, front approach and takeoff area, as well as the safety areas, mark it off with sensors. And this is how we're going to go about kind of measuring what some of these aircraft capabilities are, right? So the FAA's approach on this is we want to have defensible, high fidelity data based upon flight tests that can help inform what our next steps for guidance and development of standards and requirements are. So, you know, we've really kind of come a long way in a short period of time to get to the point where we've even been able to issue some interim guidance in the form of engineering brief number 105 on vertiport design. So really kind of extending on some of the other things that we're looking at is even our human factors research folks came together for really the graphics that I'm sharing you here, but we're even getting down into signage, markings, of pavement, lighting, these types of things in the environment where the landing infrastructure needs to be, and trying to evaluate or determine from a pilot's perspective and from the users of the NAS, what makes sense for the marking and what's going to produce the safest environment for coming in and doing landing. So sharing for you here a little bit of what that's looked like in terms of simulations that our human factors folks did to kind of evaluate, you know, preferences and what the response was to different types of markings and pavements for vertiports. But I'll go ahead and pause right here and say, again, we're not operating in a vacuum in the Office of Airports, certainly not the agency. We're engaged with our international partners as well. So as much as possible, we're using this terminology of trying to harmonize things where it's practicable for us to be able to align some of those policy and guidance type of requirements with folks like, say, EASA or the European Union of Aviation Safety Agency. So when we see those possibilities, we're certainly trying to make those connections, and marking for pavements is one of those. So really to kind of recap a little bit of where we've been going with advanced observability and the infrastructure is more recently, as of last year, I mentioned already that we issued really this interim guidance for vertiport design. So that was a big win, and we kind of joke about it internally. We made a promise, John Dermody more specifically made a promise we were going to have this issued by the end of the summer, and no kidding, I think it was the last day of summer, we actually had this out. So that's good news. We're happy to report that. And really where we go from here is we're working with industry. We're working with these other federal partners on a performance-based AC. So that is the end goal. And in order for us to get to that point, that's why we're putting so much time and energy and resources into the research, because ultimately we know that there's going to be an interest in having performance-based standards that are specific to the characteristics of each individual aircraft. So this is an exciting time. We're even looking at things related to, you know, kind of sites around the country that maybe are going to come up in the future through some different initiatives that were even announced at the ACT here just in the last week. So really though, we've been talking about vertiports, talk about vertiport design elements. I wanted to kind of share with you all, but I mean, this is probably not too different than what you all have seen helicopters use and what you'll see out of the helicopter AC, but helicopter design AC. But again, research is necessary in order for us to kind of continue forward with having that performance-based AC and evaluating the characteristics of these vertical takeoff and land aircraft or electric short takeoff and land aircraft and what their capabilities are. So with that, I'm going to pivot over shortly to commercial space. Certainly this is an area in the portfolio that is heavier in terms of the amount of interest, or I'd say the amount of activity, depending on where you are in the country. And here in Southwest, obviously there's quite a bit. So if you look at the launch sites, the licensed launch sites that we have, there's quite a few in the Southwest region, and certainly kind of on the Southeast coast, and then over on the western side of the country as well. So really what we're seeing is more and more there's an uptick in commercial space activity, and not just in areas, say, like where you see in Boca Chica and SpaceX, and they really have a very rural environment, more or less, and it's not really kind of in an urban area. But there is interest to do at least testing that supports commercial space at airports, and reason being is you have the expertise, you have noise considerations that have been accounted for. There's several different things that make an airport a desirable focus for doing some rocket testing and things of that nature for commercial space activity. So this is something that we work hand in hand with others in the agency on primarily the Office of Commercial Space. So, our UAS launch, or excuse me, our US launch and reentry sites really kind of, we call those spaceports more or less, for lack of a better term, but they're really critical in growing our, the global commercial space industry. So we have right now 8 licensed spaceports that are coexisting on NIPIUS facilities, and 4 of those are at Part 139 airports. So this is just I like data and charts and things of that nature. This just came from our AST office, our Office of Commercial Space. They're kind of sharing with, they put together some good facts and figures to kind of show really kind of how we've seen this trend moving from back about a little over a decade ago, where it's pretty minimal, really, the commercial space activity back then, to where we are today and what they're anticipating for the years to come. So it's pretty significant, the workload and resource demand that they've been seeing, and really as it relates to how we interact with you all as sponsors. One of the things that's great is if there's interest from a sponsor or an entity approaches an airport sponsor and they're looking to maybe introduce some commercial space activities at an airport much sooner rather than later, certainly start the coordination process. But what's really important right now, and it really kind of ties back to the previous slide, for what we're seeing in terms of the tempo and the increase in the activity levels for commercial space. Having those conversations and relationships in place, and really kind of things are ripe for development in terms of commercial space operations and activity on airport can be very important. So we're certainly here and available to have those conversations with you all. So the Office of Airports, and specifically our Emerging Entrance Division, along with field offices, we're available to have those preliminary conversations with the sponsor if they're kind of looking at exploring commercial space and what that might look like for their airport. But when it gets to a point where there's actually, I would say, a customer or a client or somebody that's truly interested in bringing that development to the airport, that's a great time to start having those conversations and really kind of maybe starting to submit some of those materials for consideration to have some licensing options. But in reality, there's a lot of work that goes into really trying to ensure that we're having cross-line of business communication to position things for success to kind of help you all. And one of those things is there's really kind of like an initial application that the Commercial Space Office made available. So it's web-based. You can submit some preliminary information and kind of spool up communication with them as well. But what we try to keep in mind is there's several different authorizations that go into commercial space, and the approvals and authorizations for those types of activity. One is the Air Traffic Organization for airspace. The other is going to be with the Office of Airports and the airport sponsor, specifically for physical access to the facility, but also any potential updates to the ALPs. And trying to think through, what are some of those elements tied to maybe fuels or propellants and things of that nature that might be needed. As well as if there's a licensing element to this as well, or to a proposed activity and development in the Office of Commercial Space. So lots of different components of this process, where there's just not one single FAA authorization that's a catch-all. There's actually several different tiers of the process. So giving you all an idea of what that looks like. So I mentioned kind of this pre-application with AST. It's pretty short. It's intended to be short. It's just supposed to kind of start that dialogue and conversation when an airport feels they're at that point and they have maybe some customers that are coming to the table, or some developers that are interested in using the facility for that purpose. So quickly, as I'm kind of rounding the final turn here, I'll talk about UAS. And UAS really is it's something that for a number of years, and really I would say probably even over the last decade, we've just kind of seen this trend for the maturity of small unmanned aircraft, the integration of those into the airspace system for a variety of different purposes. With that, it's really just kind of, there's been a lot of new regulations that have come as a result. Thinking back to when initially there was Section 333 exemptions that were out there for private users and a smaller unmanned aircraft to perform their operations, to where we are now with near real-time authorization available through LANC-enabled airports and UAS facility map grids. So we've come a long way. realizing that there's an interest in an element in the airport system, our tech center as well is exploring what those elements of on-airport applications for unmanned aircraft might be. So that could be for evaluating obstructions and obstacles, doing pavement inspections, looking at perimeter surveillance, among several others that there's ongoing research that is happening through the tech center that ultimately we as in AAS 200 at headquarters, working with those other subject matter experts and other directorates, we're going to formulate policy and guidance that we can then present to the field for the use of these unmanned aircraft in the airport environment. So with that, I'll mention that in November of last year, we did push out a letter to airport sponsors that kind of speaks through the on-airport operations, and that's available online on our website. As well, thinking about unmanned aircraft, detection and response is important also. So there's been a significant effort since 2018 as it relates to several different tech center led research to test and explore identification detection technology for UAS and counter capabilities. So hoping by the end of this fiscal year, we'll have that wrapped up and ready to present to Congress. So I'll wrap up here real quickly. We're looking at hydrogen and electric, partnering with the National Research Energy Labs on those research elements. These slides will be a leave behind for you all to get more information on that. And then we also have a web page that's available that kind of wraps up everything that we're doing right now. But with that said, I'll hold to the end for any questions, but we're happy to be here to support you all. And thanks again for the opportunity to present this information.
Thanks, Mike. Next up is Karen Corrier. Karen is the Director of Planning and Planning at the Houston Airport System with 20 years in aviation. I'm going to let Karen briefly talk about herself, Karen, while I load up your slide presentation.
Thank you, Vivek. All right, so you have, yes, so I lead the Planning and Development Group at Houston Airport Information Division and Sustainability Divisions. All right, so I think Vivek here asked me to cover an airport perspective on the case of just future mobility. So I'll focus my talking points on just 5 elements for an airport perspective.
Karen, just give me a second. This is not letting me. I'm going to need the AAA staff to help me share. It's not letting me share my screen, Grace. Can you all see my screen now?
Yep, I can see it.
All right.
Right. So so this I briefly introduced myself. I think for the sake of time, we will just get straight into the talking points here. So Vivek asked me to condense the conversation and have more of a discussion as opposed to a presentation here to talk about the items that we would look at from an airport perspective as we begin to determine how we will accommodate this segment, this new segment that is upon us. FAA has been very forthcoming and inclusive in their development of the guidelines. And so as airports, obviously, we live and we breathe by those advisory circulars. So we continue to look to the FAA to publish more of those engineering briefs and to give us a guidance on how we accommodate this new segment. However, that is also an opportunity, right, for the airports to interact with the FAA and to interact with other stakeholders within the aviation industry on how we accommodate this new segment. Safety is a key item for us. When you talk of airports, the first thing, obviously, you're thinking safety, safety, safety. And when we from an airport perspective, we're looking primarily on our immediate airspace. So we're thinking from an airport planning perspective on the approaches and the departures. So we have our standard traffic patterns on our airfield. And so now we have this new segment of eVTOLs that are coming in. How do they interact with our patterns in the airport, and how do they affect the capacity? Because we then begin to have challenges with potential delays if there's and how we mitigate those situations. So those are some of the things that we begin to look for at an airport. And we definitely can appreciate that this is a new segment. So in and of itself, it's an opportunity. But within that, the landing areas and the design layouts for those landing areas, FAA might have touched on those elements. So what we're trying to see is how do we accommodate for those requirements, and where would we place some of those landing pads, right? Across the industry or in the airports, we're beginning to have conversations. Would that be potential of landing on top of a garage? Would that be potential of landing on top of a cargo building rooftop? Or would that be landing in areas that are, you know, your regular at-grade landing sites that are adjacent to the airfield? So those are some of the opportunities that we begin to see, and how do we interconnect our facilities so that we have those connectivities straight into our terminal areas and onto the airfield, as we typically do across the airports. Mike also touched on design groups, requirements, and etc. So those are things that we would like to understand better from an airport planning perspective. We want to understand the load bearing for those items. So, for example, like I said, there's opportunity for putting it in a parking garage. What are the load-bearing items that we need to consider, right? If we're talking about hazardous and material, when it comes to you know, winter operations, for example, in that situation, what are those challenges? And then items such as firefighting and rescue. We know we have battery chargers, and these are electrical. That's a very different situation of firefighting than it is your regular aircraft, right? So those are some of the challenges that we begin to look. And then now we're opening it up, and we are having a new AOA, for example, in an area which is more landside. So we've expanded that buffer and so we need to figure out what are those security requirements that we need to provide in those facilities to ensure a sterile AOA operation. So from a safety guideline, I think that's one of the items, those are some of the items that we're looking at. And then on a customer or service perspective, what are we thinking about as an airport? Who is your passenger, right? And what kind of service are you providing at the airport? So likely it's going to be your high-end passenger. So in that, there's an opportunity for premium service at the airports. That, however, gives you in of itself challenges. So for example, a high-end customer may want to connect straight from the eVTOL right into their clubs and on into their aircraft, be it domestic or international travel. What then does that mean to security screening? Are we going to do security screening in those remote areas, or how do we quickly have that quick service connection into our existing facilities? So those are some of the touch points of the passenger path that as an airport, we're beginning to try and study and look at. And then, for example, if you're talking about your trial experience passenger, so for your trial experience passenger, they may not really care too much if they are being shuttled then from this vertiport location through your cabs onto your terminal areas. But what does that mean for our land side and our cabs and additional shuttle in those areas? Again, capacity needs that we're beginning to look at in our facility. The big opportunity here, as the industry already can foretell, is cargo delivery service. And what does that look like? So you can imagine a cargo providers set up near the airport with a distribution center near the airport, and as I mentioned, a rooftop pad. So it's having your automated warehouse up to the deliveries, and out you go. For those last mile deliveries. Again, those are things that as the airport we begin to look at, because what is that significant traffic that then flows into our cargo areas to provide more of that robust delivery service that is right at the airport property lines. Okay. Other things that we begin to look at as an airport, for the sake of time, just trying to condense all this and rush through this, is the infrastructure. And when I talk about infrastructure, what I'm really emphasizing here is our utilities and our energy. And Mike did mention, your electrical and your hydrogen power. So these are new sustainable energy sources. Very great opportunity, right? But as the airports, we also then begin to look at how much megawatt capacity do we have right now? How much are we going to need to accommodate for this new segment? And do our energy providers, right, then are they able to accommodate for that delta? And so to begin to have those conversations with our energy providers on how we accomplish that for the electrical provisions. Now, we as the airports may consider to offset some of this energy and self-provide. So say, for example, self-provide solar energy. But the question then becomes is, when we do that and we have that opportunity to offset that, is that energy reliable? So again, when you're talking about the infrastructure, it's not just about the capacity that you're able to provide, it's about the resiliency and the redundancy to provide that capacity for 365, 24/7 operation. So as the airports, we're beginning to look at that. Similar item on the hydrogen power rate. What are those implications that we need to, as an airport, look at? It's, again, as I mentioned, that's a renewable source of energy. It's a great opportunity, very sustainable for the environment. But what are the safety implications? We know that those are highly flammable. And then, the weight-bearing items for such stations, again, if it's depending on where the landing pads are. Again, opportunities and challenges that we're looking on the infrastructure side. Stakeholder coordination, very important, right? Because the airports, we do exist within communities. These communities are very important to us. And we need to begin to have that conversation on how we accommodate this new segment within their communities, our communities, and their economies as well. So the surrounding communities, as you can imagine, being in the airport area, is this concern about now you have this new segment, the aircraft are flying lower, and maybe the noise implications that come along with that. What are the mitigation strategies? What is that conversation that we begin to have with our communities and our stakeholders at large? And begin to collaborate really as an industry as a whole, which we're doing. And then lastly, but not least, is funding. We gotta pay for all this, right? And thankfully, in the last couple of years or so, we've had federal funding opportunities that are more than just the historical limited to really AIP airfield projects. So it's interesting to begin that conversation. If those will be eligible, how will those be eligible? Some of the funding strategies inclusive of PFCs. So you can imagine your PFC structure, right? Will this be considered as connecting traffic? So for example, if an airline has a service that then you're connecting onto this eVTOL, and then how do you spread those? What are the PFC charges? Those opportunities and challenges that go along with that. But within that funding challenge of having to fund that and rely on the FAA, this in of itself is a new revenue generating stream for the airports. So that's a great opportunity for us. And it is also a great opportunity as well, right, for public-private funding opportunities as we roll out this segment. So in a nutshell, really, and in summary, if you will, from an airport perspective, in terms of future mobility, we are really there to continue to serve as a transportation node. And this is a new segment within the transportation node, and so we will continue to do that. And it's to provide that transportation, do what we do, which is really to connect the people, the businesses, the cultures, and the economies to our cities, and in our case, to Houston. Thank you. I think that covers it, Vivek.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Really appreciate it. Great insight. I wanted her to be direct to you and not read off from a screen, and I appreciate her doing that. I'm going to stop sharing, and Leiden, you're on next. If you want to just briefly introduce yourself, Leiden, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. And then I'm going to, can everyone see the presentation?
We can.
All right, glorious. So, I'm Leiden Sleeper. I'm the East Policy Lead for Joby Aviation. I'll talk a little bit about a little bit more about Joby in a second. But my sort of day-to-day life is to help think about, from the state and local policy side, what are the regulatory frameworks and regulations and that we need to think through as we build toward our commercial launch in 2025. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to be super quick. And as proofs that we are always on the same page with the FAA, and I appreciate you, Mike, a lot of my slides say a bunch of the stuff that Mike touched on. So I'm actually just going to fly through them, both for the sake of time and redundancy, and my appreciation for Mike and the FAA. I think just real quick, I do think it's important to reiterate that there is a fundamental change happening in the world of aviation, made possible by electric propulsion. And while we are very, very happy and proud to be one of the industry leaders in eVTOLs and urban air mobility, there's a lot of companies in the space that are doing some version of what we do. We think about intra-city and sort of intra-regional mobility. There's a lot of people thinking about cargo. There's a lot of people sort of more focused on regional mobility. There's some people focused on eVTOLs, vertical takeoff and landing. I know Beta has been doing a lot of work with their CTOL. So there's a lot of different things happening. And I think, again, credit to the FAA for certainly 2 generations and probably more. The US has been a leader in global aviation. And I think credit to the team at FAA for continuing to make sure that the US leads when thinking about new entrants and sort of how we work through our certification process. They've been sort of great partners in thinking through all of the different sort of truly creative things that we need to come up with in terms of the aircraft, and then also the infrastructure, the airspace, all of it. And they are tackling it with gusto and have said publicly that we're going to certify by next year. And we've said publicly that following that certification, we're going to launch commercial service in 25. just a little bit more about us. I think most of you sort of know who we are. We're a vertically integrated transportation company. We have an aircraft that can take off and land vertically, but it is a tilt rotor, so all 6 propellers tilt forward. I'm going to show a video of it in a second. I have here targeting entry into service in 2024. I think we'll probably start commercial service in 25. But you may have seen news recently that we have an agreement with the DoD that we're going to have some aircraft on base, and we're going to begin some of our operational work and sort of moving around, test our charging infrastructure, things like that on base in 24, which would be, I think, an exciting opportunity for us. And then just last note, we went public in the summer of years are blurring, summer of 22. And have raised about 2.4 billion in capital to date. So when you think about the sort of new entrants into the system, we're very happy to have the Joby S4, which you can see on the picture there, and to be well funded and set up for our market launch coming up. But I think many of you have seen the aircraft, but just to sort of highlight it, that's the S4. You saw it takes off just like a helicopter. Here it is transitioning. One of the hardest things about these aircraft is to get the transition right. We've done the transition now thousands of times. There it is. You sort of saw a quick clip of it flying on the wing, and now it's transitioning back and will sort of land just like a traditional helicopter. It is 100% electric, 0 emissions, range of about 150 miles. For the eagle-eyed folk on this call, you probably noticed there was not a pilot flying it. We do all of our flight testing from a ground station. When we launch our commercial service, we will have pilots on board. And again, hat tip to the FAA for the work they're doing to get the SFAR complete. I think last thing just to say is this is not a brand new aircraft that we created yesterday. We've been working on this prototype. We have 10 years in development. They've been working on it for about 13, 14 years. It has flown thousands of flights. I think we just announced that we have flown enough miles to circumvent the globe. So we are flying it 4 times a day in our facility out in California. And it is, if I leave you with one takeaway, it's that this aircraft is real and very much not theoretical. And so we look forward to working with all of you as you think through your planning of the different airports that you're responsible for. I'm just going to hit this slide very, very quickly, and then one more, and then I'll wrap up. The sort of, as we all know, the amazing thing about this industry is nobody does anything alone. And so I think it's just worth calling out. There's a lot of different partners that we work very closely with, that we are relying on for different pieces of our strategy. Obviously, we're building the aircraft. You just saw the S4. From a manufacturing perspective, we're excited to have Toyota be an investor. We have what we call a small scale manufacturing facility out in California, and we're this year going to roll off our first production scale aircraft, and having Toyota as a partner has been very helpful in sort of looking over our shoulder and making sure that we know, our process is efficient, we're doing things the right way, and their expertise has been very, very helpful. From a passenger perspective, many of you saw that we announced a partnership with Delta at the end of last year. Essentially, what that partnership is if you were to go on and book a Delta flight from, say, JFK, I'm a New Yorker, so apologies for using New York airports. If you were to book a flight from JFK to Heathrow or something, you'll have the option through the Delta app to book a Joby for your trip to the airport. So really trying to work a sustainable option and solution to solve for some of that last mile trips that New Yorkers have to deal with in getting to our airports. And then operations and testing, talked a little bit about our DoD work and sort of continuing our work with them. Also, NASA has been a great partner, helping to think through airspace work, but also we had them on out with us in California to verify our sound profile. And they put a whole bunch of sound arrays out there. And the joke that is true that we always use is our aircraft is so quiet, they had to cut the grass shorter because the wind rolling over the long grass was registering a louder noise than our aircraft was when it was flying over at 1,500 feet. So when we are at our loudest at takeoff from 300 feet away, we're 65 decibels, and then flying overhead, we're 45. So you'll hear us say quiet as a conversation or whisper quiet. That we think is one of the sort of true unlock of this technology. And one of the reasons why we think that we're going to be able to get closer to communities and really provide a different option than helicopters currently provide, because I think, as we all know and have lived with, communities have a very strong opinion about sound and how they interact with aviation. And we think this is a moment where we can sort of fundamentally change that dynamic, and that's very exciting for us. And just for the sake of flying through, and as proof again that I'm absolutely on the same page as my colleagues, I'll just say we imagine a world where we can utilize existing infrastructure in the early years, but I do want to make sure that I put in a plug, especially for this crowd, as we start to think about what new aviation infrastructure looks like and how we structure it. Mike, I'm sorry, I have a circle around mine, not the triangle. I'll work on it in my presentation. But I do think that there's going to be a future state that has vertiports or heliports that are sort of specifically designed for us, that have charging infrastructure, therefore powered lift aircraft like us. There's lots of different ways to imagine it, and I know the Office of Airports is doing a bunch of really smart work to sort of make that regulatory framework real. So we appreciate them. I would just say two things, and Karen, I totally agree with how you thought about the infrastructure around airports. I would just say two things that we think about all the time as a complement to that. One, there's definitely some in our space that want this to be an exclusive service. And I think that there's no doubt that there's going to be some sort of exclusivity, especially in the early days, because it's going to be so new. But I do think that the end state for us is to have a product that is economically accessible to more people, right? One of the challenges to growth and market growth in the helicopter community is just how expensive it is. And I think we're going to want to try and get that price point much lower to serve a much wider swath of people. And then last thing I'll say, just to double down, Karen, on what you said, really thinking about an experience that gets our customers as close to the terminal as possible is how we are starting to think about infrastructure at airports. Because, and Karen, again, you were totally right. If we're in a place where we are landing people at an FBO, putting them in a van, driving to the terminal, they're just that's not a great experience for them, and that's gonna be problematic for us, and I think for all of you. So I apologize for flying through that, but yeah, open for any questions, and I will stop sharing.
I really appreciate that, Lionel. That was great. Really connects us with what we used to read about as young children in comic books or whatever.
We're getting there. We're getting there. It's close.
So I don't see. Okay, here's one from Joel Jenkinson at Addison Airports. Question is for Leiden. Is Joby planning to offer commercial service in the DFW area? And if so, when and from where?
Wow, you're trying to have me break news here. Goodness gracious. There's no secret. That is a great market, one of the great markets in the United States. I'm not going to commit to any days or times or launches here, but it's certainly an area that I think a lot of players in our space are looking closely at, and would love to have a more detailed conversation about how to make it a reality.
So maybe I can follow up on that, Leiden. So you said you were expecting first launch or first commercial service in 25. Do you have a target launch venue or airport for that, or is it still being?
Well, according to this call, I'm going to DFW. No, I think no, totally. Do not quote me on somewhere JB is like, wait, what? No, I mean, I think in our partnership with Delta, we announced thinking about New York and Los Angeles as early markets. So I think that has been out there. There's a lot of people in our space that are thinking about Miami and the South Florida area. There's a lot of opportunity there. And there's no doubt that certainly around Dallas, there's a lot of activity and interest there among companies. So again, not trying to break any news, but it is certainly a market that folk are interested in.
Great. You know, this is one question I wanted to ask each one of you, and really, since the title is Opportunities and Challenges, to ask you, what is the biggest challenge? I want to ask each one of you, and anybody can start, from the FAA's perspective, from the airport's perspective, or from the operator's perspective. Whoever wants to go first? Or do we want to go in the same order? Mike, did you want to take it up first? The commercial launch of AAM service, what do you see? Any big challenges on the horizon, or you've got everything, all the decks are clear?
Yeah, Vivek, I think that as with any new technology or some sort of even the integration that goes along with that, the challenges are going to be who are the users. In this instance, the certification of aircraft to get to certified aircraft. There's R&D that's being conducted by the OEMs, and then there's going to be that transfer of information, right, to validate data and what the aircraft capabilities are. That's ultimately going to go into the cert process for the aircraft, and then also what we'll have for performance-based AC. So as far as challenges, I don't know there's necessarily challenges other than these are just the steps that will have to occur naturally as it relates to the rulemaking process, building guidance and policy, and then ultimately, just kind of having that framework for standards, but all keeping in mind that safety mindset that we have as an agency for the NAS. And oftentimes there can be some references or comparisons, which those are going to naturally occur on, maybe there's this activity that, another place or another country or another CAA is permitting or allowing certain types of activities related to advanced air mobility or unmanned aircraft, even for that matter. But really, we have the most complex NAS in the world, the most active NAS in the world, and it's also the safest. So I think the biggest thing that we're trying to do is work hand in foot with industry, with folks like yourself, Vivek, with our airport sponsors, to collectively bring all that data and information together for being able to see a successful rollout of AM activity, right, at scale, achieving different milestones for the maturity levels of the technology once they're there and tested and proven. So really, again, not so much as challenges as it is, these are just steps in the process that have to occur, specific to our national airspace system and what we as professionals and also the general public have come to expect in terms of safety. And one other thing, Leiden, I'll just mention to you, so I appreciate you having some openness to maybe reevaluating how you're depicting the markings for the vertiport. We're using the broken wheel right now, sir. So if you want to use that one, you can throw it in there as well.
Deal. I got it.
Karen, how about you?
biggest challenge is getting on the same page about images and acronyms.
Go ahead, Leiden, since you're on screen. Why don't you go ahead and tell us?
No. I say real quick. And Karen, I didn't mean to jump on it. I would just say I think the biggest challenge is people. A lot of people in our space think about us sort of being a better version. Or a sort of different version of a helicopter and want to treat us as such. And I think I would just challenge everybody, the success and future of the industry, I think we have to think a little bit different and take advantage of some of the incredible benefits of electric propulsion, like the sound and the sustainability options, to reimagine how we have aerial mobility interact with airports. And if we're just going to rely on FBOs, the financial model won't work. It's just going to be hard. We're going to end up putting a lot of investment to move people around on buses and cars anyway. And I think we just need to be as creative as we can to make sure that we're thinking in a totally different way about how to integrate sort of future AAM, especially for passengers, into terminals.
Thanks. And last but not the least, Karen, your important perspective from the airport side.
Yes, all the points that the gentleman here have raised is important. I think if you'd peg me to pick one of the challenges, out of the ones that I mentioned, I would say is the energy sources, right? And that's really because we are relying on our energy providers to provide that that capacity. And so being able to engage them, you know, as our cities grow, that population demand grows, you know, they have their capacity requirements to meet. And so if we add this on top of that, and we're still learning what those requirements are, what the forecast numbers are for that volume. And so being able to accommodate that energy requirement, and again, energy being the capacity as well as the resiliency of it. So being able to provide both of that together.
Great point. And that is a great segue into the next question on the chat. And it's being, I don't know the gentleman's name, I apologize. But the demand for charging stations on the land side and the air side, like GSE, eVTOLs, rental vehicles, and personal vehicles added to the standard airport power demands. Are our airports behind the curve of getting the power infrastructure in place? We need to look at the power demand needs in master plans, etc. That's something that goes right to you, Karen.
Yeah, so again, piggybacking on what I just said on that. And so airports, you know, we talk about the master plans for airports, but as well in that focus on utility master plans and that utility provision of that. So I would not say that we are behind. I would say that we are engaging our partners, and those discussions evolve over time. So having to have, those are long lead discussions that happen, right? Because in some instances you have sole providers in certain markets. And so
Sure.
being able to have those discussions earlier and have those commitments earlier to be able to move that. And to be able to leverage that growth in the economy that is not only for the benefit of the airport, it also impacts the providers and it impacts the whole community and aviation as a whole, right? The economy in its entirety. We saw what aviation transportation does during COVID. So we definitely want to have those. So I wouldn't say we're behind. They're long lead conversations, and those conversations have begun.
All right, thank you. One last
Vivek,
question.
if I could just add something real quick to that. So so Karen's exactly right. I think there is going to be kind of this progression of maybe a phased approach for the introduction of what does that electrical demand look like by airport, by the services that are being offered, by the demand, whether it's through providing the electrical means for your providers of services such as Joby and others that may be operating at their airfield, but kind of extending down to the service equipment and the ops vehicles. So at a high level, there's been conversations, and we're hoping that we'll glean some information. I want to put a plug in here again for, there's a slide I had on our NREL research, our National Research Energy Lab research on hydrogen and then electrical, basically evaluations and how that ties into the needs at the airport level to support advanced air mobility activity and some of these other initiatives as well. So the FAA is looking at it research-wise. We're probably going to have some research to share here by the summer, fall timeframe. So just kind of put a plug out there for that. I think that's going to help Karen, you and others in the airport community. And I think ACRP is also looking at some of this as well, some of their projects. So I'm in agreement that at this point in time, I don't think it's a matter of being behind the curve. I think it's a matter of having a better understanding of what the need is. And then there's going to be the demand analysis that kind of comes as a result on the back end to evaluate what are those additional improvements or projects that need to occur on a very subjective basis for an airport.
Lina, did you have
and if I could add on that, sorry. So
go ahead,
when you do the planning items, right? So we have the trigger points to what he said, the phased approach. So what we need to zero in on, what are those trigger points that then trigger us to additional investment, additional capacity, additional involvement from others.
That's great. Lina, did you want to add anything from your perspective for electrical?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an issue. I think it's sort of bespoke to different airports and grids, like we're all saying. We sort of describe very, very roughly. Our charging need per aircraft is about the equivalent of 2 Tesla superchargers. So it's real charging infrastructure, but we find that it's not charging capacity that's wildly out of the realm of what a lot of airports are starting to think about or have been thinking about for their electric vehicle stations. So that's sort of that rough context how we think about it.
Well, I want to, I know we've got a lot of questions. I certainly have so many, but we unfortunately have to end here. We've already gone over time. I do appreciate everybody sticking around with us. I thank you for your interest. I really want to thank the 3 speakers. I want to thank SCCAAE for this opportunity for, bringing this topic out to you. And then I do want to make a plug for the SCCAAE South Central Conference, South Central Chapter Conference in Oklahoma City from the 14th to the 16th in Oklahoma City. We hope to see you all there, and everybody stay safe and have a good rest of your day. And thank you, my panelists, as well as everybody that attended.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.